And hello, Hearts of Oak. Thanks so much for joining us once again for a brand new guest that I've had the privilege of following in regards to all the medical information that's coming out of the McCullough Foundation. That is Nicolas Hulscher. Nicholas, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks for having me.
Great to have you. And so much, as we said just before we recorded, I've been really intrigued and fascinated and benefited from what you put out in a world where we get so much information. And certainly for me, you have been my more recent go to in terms of information coming out on the health side, especially. But people can follow you there. Nick Culture is your handle on X, on Twitter. Make sure and follow Nick, and you'll get all the links on everywhere else he is in the description. But Nick, you've been very involved. You've been someone who's been vocal. You've been on social media with the McCullough Foundation. You do a lot of work in terms of the social media aspect, in terms of the scientific research, in terms of the kind of that public information and connection. But maybe I could ask you to give you a little bit of an introduction. I think maybe the US audience will know you. I've seen you on lots of US shows. Maybe the UK audience may be a little bit less familiar with you. So if I could ask you for just introduce yourself before we get on to the range of issues that you're covering on your X feed.
Yeah, so my name is Nicolas Hulscher. I am an epidemiologist at the McCullough Foundation, where Dr. Peter McCullough is the president of the foundation. I'm the administrator there, as well as the epidemiologist. I did receive a master's in public health from the University of Michigan School in Public Health, so I do have formal training in epidemiology. And since 2023, with the McCullough Foundation, we have actually published over 20 scientific studies exposing the harms of the mRNA inoculations.
Well, it's want to get into this, and I've had the privilege of having Peter on, I think twice, and also meeting him. I remember meeting them, Peter and his wife and John Leake for dinner. We had dinner in Dallas a year ago, so maybe I can catch up with you on my next trip stateside. But uh, there's so much, and I just wanted to delve in because I think it's so important for our viewers at Hearts of Oak to get an overview of where we are because it is so fast moving, so much happening. So I want to delve into your post. But just before I do that, if I just want to thank our viewers, Hearts of Oak, our supporters, our followers, for all their small donations. Your £5, £10 a month is fantastic and helps us keep going. And there are the links, donor box and give send go. And we really do appreciate your support in that. But for you, one of the latest posts, I think just like a day or 2 days ago, was COVID-19 mRNA shots destroy 8.4% of non-renewable eye cells in just 75 days. And I delved into this and was blown away. And it's one of the latest pieces of information that we are getting on the damage of the mRNA jabs. Maybe you can give us a little bit of an update and explain what that means, this new concerning development.
Yeah, so over the past 5 years, we have received and found numerous studies showing the actual or adverse events regarding the eyes, right? So actually, there's been over 20 studies that outline, people actually do suffer from blindness, from nearsightedness, blurry vision after these injections, epidemiologically. This is the first study to show it biologically, literally by looking physically in vaccinated individuals' eyes. And so they looked at over 60 healthy young adults, before and after they got Pfizer. And what they found was, in about 75 days after the Pfizer injection, they looked in the eyes and they found an 8.4% decrease in what's called cell density. So basically, 8.4% of the corneal endothelium cells were destroyed. And what are corneal endothelium cells? Well, this is actually the base layer of cells on the cornea, the outer layer of the eye. And so when that goes bad, like the mRNA injections have been shown to do, destroy that causes cellular distortions, so irregular shapes of cells. It increased inflammatory markers. It did all sorts of things that were extraordinarily damaging to the eye. But what this can result in is cloudy vision and even blindness in rare cases. And we also have to remember that these cells do not regenerate, they're non-renewable. So once these corneal endothelial cells are destroyed, they're gone, right? And you will need a corneal transplant to basically replace that once those are gone. So this is very serious. We know that vision is so important in our daily lives, and so when you start to degrade that with repeated booster after repeated booster, you will likely um, incur some eye damage.
I, I don't remember reading that eye loss was one of the side effects of the mRNA jab.
Yeah, I do not remember either. They do not talk about that very often, but yeah, this is one of those adverse events that's definitely becoming uncovered.
Download the Getter app right now. It's totally free. It's where I put up exclusively all of my content 24 hours a day. You want to know what Steve Bannon's thinking? Go to Getter.
So don't wait. Download the Getter app now.
Sign up for free and be part of the movement.
But one of the other areas is pets. Weirdly, I had this conversation with a couple of friends, and their pets have been going to be jabbed with all the different vaccines that pets have. And you'd put up, it was a while ago, but you put up fairly recently about self-amplifying mRNA vectors and the whole issue of shedding. And you kind of think of husband and wife maybe actually one doesn't get and one does get, and the shedding from that. But pets actually hadn't been on my radar, so it was curious to read that. Maybe you can give us a little bit of more info on that.
Yeah, so what's disturbing is here in the United States, the USDA last year approved a self amplifying RNA particle injection for dogs and cats for rabies, for canine flu, for feline leukemia virus. So basically, for all these different diseases, they have approved, developed by Merck, this RNA particle. It works a little bit differently. They call it an RNA particle, not mRNA. So they're kind of changing the words around a bit. But if you look in their details of how their product works, it does say it does self-replicate in the body. So that's how we kind of identify that this is indeed self-amplifying. And they kind of rolled it out and approved it unsuspectingly. That was kind of under the radar. Nobody really knew about it. Well, now we are raising the alarm because this is actually quite serious, right? When you have animals being injected with basically synthetic viruses, these self-amplifying particles, that can likely shed onto humans through bodily fluids or breath. Um, and not only will the SAM RNA, the self-amplifying RNA, shed, but the toxic antigen products produced by these animals can also shed onto the human owners. And we don't know how long this can shed for. None of this was tested. But also, one very concerning thing when it comes to self amplifying RNA is these particles can interact with viruses in the wild and actually create chimeric mutants that we have no clue what they will do. And so basically, it's an absolute disaster, another wide scale experiment that is going haywire.
I mean, that just term self-amplifying or replicating, you kind of expect, we have expected maybe from a long time, that whenever you get an injection for something, that is for a specific purpose. But the whole issue of self-amplifying, replicating, that I mean, has this really been looked into, this concept, or is this purely on the new mRNA drugs?
Yeah, self-amplifying is basically purely on these new mRNA drugs, as far as I'm aware. But there's about 33 of them in development for humans, right? So they're trying to advance the already experimental mRNA tech into self-amplifying for humans. And this is already seen in Japan, European Union, India. These countries have approved Arcturus Therapeutics self-amplifying mRNA injection for COVID-19. So it's already deployed to the human population, interacting with wild viruses and probably shedding onto unsuspecting bystanders. Now, and then with the 33 in development, they are trying to get these through, and so this is very worrisome, very disappointing. That not only have they already gotten away with the original shots that cause catastrophic harm, but now they're getting away with rolling out the mRNA shots on steroids.
Wow, wow, wow. I want to get your thoughts on some of the legislative process that has happened, obviously, with the Trump administration, with Bobby Kennedy there, really pushing back a lot of the issues in terms of food, in terms of big pharma. But one of the very recent announcements was he said that mercury will no longer be available in vaccines. And then I delved into your posts, and you talked about thimerosal being a compound that's based on mercury, or a preservative, I think. And you talked about that being extremely poisonous. Give us your thoughts on it, because again, sometimes the information you get on vaccines, sometimes you think, am I going down a rabbit hole, or is this true? And then you begin to realize this is purely about profit, and anything the pharma industry can do to make money, they will do, because their responsibility to their shareholders, not to the public. But give us a little bit of an understanding of this issue about mercury not being in vaccines.
Yeah, so let's start with what's happened in the past few years here in America. So first, about 2 decades ago, actually, about a decade ago, they actually already removed thimerosal from most vaccines, including most flu vaccines. And so, what in the past like decade or so, thimerosal was in only a few percent of the total vaccines here in America. So, it was addressed earlier, but now we do see a complete ban, and it's wiped out of all the remaining flu vaccinations that did include thimerosal. Now, so while it is only a small amount that are affected now, it's still vitally important because it is extremely, extremely toxic to the human body. A review paper by Geyer and colleagues did find, I mean, it's so toxic, it was destroying neurons in the test tube. It was causing birth defects. It was linked to autism. It was extraordinarily toxic to cells, all types of cells, and it was more toxic than lead and other forms of mercury. And so it's basically such a dangerous substance. It does not belong in injectable products. It should have never have been in any vaccines whatsoever. And this can lead us now into the discussion of aluminum and these other vaccine adjuvants as well.
Does this all stem from the pharma companies getting that protection in the 80s from prosecution? Does it kind of stem from that, and then they could do what they like, or was this prior to that?
Yeah, so it appears that yeah, they probably did keep it in because they don't face any penalty for harms, right? They can't get sued. They are protected by the 1986 Vaccine Injury Compensation Act. So they're protected, and so they have no incentive to remove any of these toxic things because they keep it in because right, it was cheap, probably cheap, and it prevented bacteria from growing, and they're like, all right, well, we don't need to find anything safer. They don't care when people get harmed, they don't face penalty, so why would they spend the time and money to improve it? They had no incentive. and they've been caught over and over again with criminal activities, paying massive fines for other things. They just clearly don't care about human health. So yeah, they kept it in there as long as possible, and now finally it is being forced out. But there's many other things that they're still keeping in that they should not be keeping in.
Is this, I mean, is it simply a pushback, just kind of understanding the state and the federal level? Is this a pushback that can happen on the state level in terms of big pharma and the rollout, or is this a federal, and therefore it's up to RFK to actually really win these battles with big pharma?
Yeah, it appears it's going to have to mostly be federal, right? State level, it seems there's limited capacity to really change the recommendations. I mean, they can give their guidance, like so. For example, in federally, we know that RFK did issue a directive a few months ago for pregnant women and healthy children to not get mRNA shots anymore, to not recommend it to them. But then in Michigan, the Health and Human Services Department in Michigan came out and said, "Well, hold on, we actually still recommend it for six month olds and older, um, regardless of health status." And so, yes, states can still issue different directives, but it appears that real action in vaccines, when it comes to vaccines, should happen federally. But with the mRNA injections, that's a different story, right? So in the past few years, there's actually been about 10 state level initiatives to try and ban these injections in individual states. The McCullough Foundation, we were involved in a few of those, and they were all buried by leadership. They either didn't pass the committee vote, so the beginning vote for these legislations, or they kind of just were voted down by people who still believe the shots are great. And so, yeah, when it comes to state level, we are trying to get through at that level for mRNA injections specifically.
You'd put up a post saying that previous legislative efforts to ban the mRNA, in terms of state, have kind of hit a wall, but there's a growing move to that. And you talked about, I think your phrase was, to their dismay, this year's wave of legislative initiatives is planned to be far stronger. Is that because of a growing concern of the power of big pharma? Is that because of the Trump administration? Is it a combination of many issues that really help turbocharge the efforts of the states?
Well, it's not the Trump administration. The Trump administration appears to be facilitating more mRNA shots, so it's not them. What it is actually, we are collaborating with a group of individuals that were actually vital in last year's legislative efforts, and they do, and we will be assisting them. There are plans to make these efforts much more widespread and stronger, learning from past mistakes. And so, yeah, there are plans to kind of start initiating much more of these bills to try and get filed in more states this year to ban mRNA injections. And a few months ago, I believe this was the most recent one in Minnesota. They actually did file a bill classifying the mRNA shots as biological weapons of mass destruction in that state. Now, when we classify now, I do think they are they do meet that classification, but you can't get people to come to terms with that. That's going to be very difficult to pass. And so, we gotta. It appears we have to start with baby steps when it comes to this, such as limiting them for an age group, or taking one step at a time to really restrict these. Because when you bring out a blanket ban like we learned last year, people can't cope. So we'll see what happens. Obviously, we do want them to be completely banned for all ages. They're extraordinarily dangerous, and we will be trying to do that. But we'll just have to see.
Um, the issue of jabs and vaccines for children, you'd put up, I think, 5 studies link aluminium vaccine to asthma, autisms, sudden infant death syndromes, and many others. And this issue about autism, a huge concern in the West with the exponential rise of autism rates. And I know Bobby Kennedy has talked about a report coming later this year on that. Um, Give us your thought, because some of the jobs have been taken off the childhood list. There is this work on looking into autism and the rise of autism, how it's linked with jobs. How do you see kind of that going ahead and actually the truth coming out on all of that?
Yeah, we do hope that the truth comes out eventually, completely. Um, with autism and with aluminum and all these things, yeah, we do have in September, according to RFK, in September this fall sometime, there will be a large report on the association between vaccination and autism. But in parallel, actually, at the McCullough Foundation, we're working on our own report that will be very comprehensive as well. And so, there will be multiple studies coming out soon, and we have much evidence right now already that does indicate there is a strong link for childhood hypervaccination and autism, because children receive about like 90 doses from 0 to 18. I mean, they're getting so many doses, toxic boluses of chemicals, because we have to remember, so aluminum is the primary target, it appears, that is causing perhaps the most harm in these injections, because it is a neurotoxin, right? It's not good for any bodily system, and multiple studies now have linked it to asthma in children. They've linked it to sudden infant death syndrome, because when you inject an underdeveloped baby with not a functional detox system, you keep injecting neurotoxins that does indeed, it appears, induce brainstem failure and thus apnea in sleep. They can't breathe and then they die. We have that, and then we do have 3 studies that link aluminum to autism or autism rates. So yeah, this ingredient should be removed from childhood vaccines. It has no place in there. We don't need neurotoxins in these injections.
Um, how how have drugs companies got away with putting ingredients into vaccines that are injected into every arm of every child? How how have they kind of got away with that without actually full research? Because during the COVID tyranny, we could there maybe is an argument for, well, we were faced with something and we had to respond quickly and therefore could discard the normal regulatory process. But then outside that, in terms of all the other injections that children get, there isn't that argument. They surely have to say they've gone through the process of making sure all those ingredients are safe. How have they got away with this for decades and decades?
Yeah, they've gotten away with this because what's called the Biopharmaceutical Complex, a conglomerate of regulatory agencies, biodefense, government, NGOs, and pharmaceutical companies. This complex, which appears to operate transnationally, does indeed exert powerful control over what medicines or vaccines are approved. And so, since our regulatory agencies have been compromised and bought out by pharma, and we have military involvement now with the mRNA shots. They're too powerful, and then that's what they do. They roll out whatever they want, right? The regulators get cash, they approve it. The pharma companies have full immunity. They don't care if it's dangerous. And so it's just this perpetual cycle of just approving, rubber stamping injection after injection without adequate placebo controlled trials, without long term safety data. Because really, for all these childhood vaccines, there is no proper long-term placebo-controlled trials. They just don't do them, and so we literally don't know the safety profiles of these. And so it's just so terrible that this has happened, and it does appear that RFK is trying to reverse this disaster. Many people are disappointed with him when it comes to the mRNA injections, because they do remain on the market. But it appears that the mRNA debacle is, like I just mentioned earlier, a military operation, and I don't. It appears he might not have the authority to do something about that.
Yeah, well, it seems like a step by step, and I think you talk to those in politics, and when they get into politics, they realize it is a longer term battle, and you can't turn things around immediately. So we'll watch that. Another post you put up is on eggs, and this kind of fits into the whole area on Maha and addressing not only big pharma but the big food companies. And it's one thing it's one of the few things I don't like going to America on is walking through a Walmart or Target and wondering which of these are actually food that a human should eat and which are not. And if they could only put a small aisle of this is food for humans and all the rest is chemicals. But this was a study, just one egg a week slashes Alzheimer's risk by nearly half. Minimal egg consumption cuts Alzheimer's risk by 47%, and reduces Alzheimer's brain pathology. I mean, it's kind of common sense and normal, but I think our societies have been taken away, certainly in the West, in terms of, you can pop a pill that fixes your symptoms as opposed to getting back and eating healthily. So, I mean, what are your thoughts? This is a wonderful, wonderful study that fits into that I think growing awareness of people that actually what they eat is the cause or the benefit of lots of things in their system as opposed to a medical help.
Right, diet is absolutely critical, right? We think of supplements, people love to take supplements, but when you really think about it, diet's actually much more important than any supplement you can take, because in an egg, for example, there's thousands of compounds, right? There's not just one isolated compound, thousands, and it's all natural and naturally occurring versions. So, yeah, diet's absolutely critical. And so, what this study did was they looked at hundreds and hundreds of Alzheimer's patients, after death, and they also followed older adults, for years, and they found that those who ate at least one egg a week had like half the risk of Alzheimer's dementia diagnosis. And so they did conduct further analysis, and it appears that choline, the nutrient choline, is a key ingredient in eggs that is likely contributing to this reduction in Alzheimer's, because it's absolutely essential for brain function, right? Many people are deficient in this nutrient, and it's absolutely critical. And so when you start to fill those gaps, like many of those older adults in that study, they probably were not eating eggs, they were eating garbage. And then you introduce this wholesome egg with so many different nutrients, all of a sudden it does improve their cognitive abilities. And it appeared to also, based on these autopsies, reduce these amyloid tangles in the brain as well. So eggs are very important.
When I think Naomi Wolf putting up videos of diet and of re-understanding how generations ago lived in terms of food. But yeah, we'll not turn this into cookery program. Although I do love my poached egg every day. But there's and I guess on that it's that there isn't. I mean, if an egg is beneficial to you, uh, 30p an egg, 40 cents an egg, then actually that begins to negate the power of big pharma. That if you can take a cheap generic product to actually help you be healthy, then there's no need for an expensive pharmaceutical product. I guess that is the battle that we have here.
Right, right. They never like cheap ingredients, cheap products. cheap medicines that are unpatentable that are shown to be effective. They hate it. And so whenever you see something that looks positive, like we saw with ivermectin and COVID-19 and all that, hydroxychloroquine, etc., since those can't be patented, that's why we saw immense media attack by the pharma-owned media on these medicines because they can't make money off of them and they're shown to be more effective than pharma's own dangerous medicines. And so, yeah, they hate it. They hate it. And that's why it's not the smartest idea to look at CNN for, proper public health advice. They're always shilling for the big pharmaceutical companies.
100%. I've been intrigued by watching the many ads for pharma companies on US TV that we don't really have in Europe. There was another. I love, Nicholas, that I can look at your posts and I can read them and think, actually, what is this compound or this mentioned thing about, and go and delve into it. And one was um, bifidobacterium. And I thought, I don't know what that is. And then looking into it, it's a microbe critical for healthy development, and is disappearing. And this was the headline you put up. 1 in 4 infants has none of this. And you realize the damage physically that many things are doing. And you mentioned pesticides, which are a huge issue, and hyper vaccination, antibiotics, etc., etc., etc. Maybe touch on that, because again, it's a range of issues that we are facing as individuals that seem to have a destructive effect on how our bodies actually should function.
Yes, yes. The microbiome of at least Americans, based on that study, is absolutely being destroyed. Absolutely destroyed. Now, with if 1 in 4 kids have no bifidobacteria, which is an essential bacterial strain that kids are supposed to be born with, supposed to be colonized in their gut, is critical for immune development, is basically critical for healthy development. You want that strain is literally disappearing. And so why the study didn't go into too much detail as to why, but it appears that there's multiple factors here. We know antibiotic use is very high. It's been high, since those have come out, and that destroys everything, right? All the bacteria in your body. So that's obviously a key factor. But then you have hyper vaccination. Over the past few decades, we have going from like 7 doses to, like I said, like about 90 doses. That is definitely going to affect gut health and composition. And then you have so many other things, C sections, right? So these births where they cut open basically the stomach of the woman and then they take the baby out that way. That avoids installing certain bacterial strains that they would have got out of the vaginal canal. So you have so many different factors, but and last thing is pesticides, very important. Actually, a recent study just found in America 47, 47 different pesticides are found in US homes, in the dust, in the water, in people's urine. It's everywhere, these toxic pesticides. So that's another huge thing as well. So basically in America, we're being bombarded with toxins on the daily.
Well, let's pray that RFK is able to tackle that, and the huge issue in terms of toxins being used in the US and being banned in many other countries. And I think I pray that we'll see a reversal of that. One other area that you put up was hair loss, and I thought this is interesting. And it was a huge study in Korea showing vaccination significantly increases the risk of hair loss, and it kind of adds to the catalog of huge issues that we are facing in society with the rollout of these jobs. Maybe you want to touch on that.
Yeah, so this study looked at, I believe it was, 6 million or millions of Koreans. and they looked to see, what increased the risk of hair loss. Was it COVID-19 infection? Was it vaccination? And then they analyzed it and they found COVID infection didn't increase the risk of hair loss significantly for any of the disorders, but vaccination statistically significantly increased the risk of three different hair loss disorders, including what's called patchy hair loss, total hair loss, so you lose all your hair. It's called alopecia totalis, um, as well as hair shedding. So it increased the risk of, basically, you go in the shower, you use shampoo, and then you find all this hair on your hands. So basically, it's disastrous for your hair health, in those who receive these injections. But it corroborated another Korean study, also from this year, who looked at another large sample size, who also found large increases in alopecia or hair loss disorders. And so that it's basically now confirmed. If you did receive these shots, you appear, based on these studies, to be at an increased risk of hair loss.
Do you think we're the push to removing that shield that vaccine companies have in terms of they can do whatever they want and it's irrelevant because they're protected legally. Do you think it is possible to actually remove that so they are liable for these damages?
Yes, there's two bills right now in America. Representative Massey, Representative Gosar. They have both filed bills. One of them basically eliminates the PrEP Act, right? And that's what protects the mRNA injections, any accountability there. So that's key. And then the other one by Gosar, that one actually would allow vaccine injured people to sue the pharmaceutical companies, and it repeals the language in the 1986 Act, which will finally allow accountability and justice for the injured. And so there are those legislative efforts ongoing in America. So there is a chance we can break through and finally hold these, what I like to call criminal enterprises, accountable.
You'd put up about a new FDA approved mRNA shot, and I think it's important for the viewers to realize that these things are not just a one off. And we're in the COVID era. Actually, they're being ruled out, and it's Moderna's new approved as called next spike. And your post was really interesting because you said in Latin, next means violent death. That would kind of fit to where we are at the moment. But you talked about 2.7% serious adverse event rate in trials, and yet it was ruled out and approved for 12 plus. I can imagine that'll be reduced down in age. But speaking to that, because again, we need to be aware that this is a process. This was not just a one event, and those are the jobs. That's it. But these vaccine companies are continually rolling out new mRNA that seem to be approved with increasing speed by the FDA.
Yes, yes, it's very disturbing that this is the case. With the new HHS administration, we were not expecting any of this, but it has happened. And yeah, M next spike is the next gen Moderna mRNA shot. Literally means M death spike in Latin. I mean, you can't even make this stuff up. And yeah, 2.7% serious adverse event rate in trials, and they still approve it. It's absolutely ridiculous. But then that was compared to a original Moderna booster shot, which had a 2.6% serious adverse event rate. So again, no placebo group, like they promised. They actually promised a few months ago all new vaccines will undergo placebo-controlled trials before licensure. Well, that didn't happen, right? There was no placebo group to be found, just this next gen. So it doesn't work the same as the original mRNA shots. This one does not encode for the full spike protein. It encodes for a few distinct parts of the spike protein, and many people actually think this will be possibly more dangerous because um, it actually these are the components of the spike protein that might maybe inducing protein misfolding. And so a lot of things are just so disturbing at this point. And we know we're going to keep raising the alarm on issues like this. And really, so they approve that, right? But really, basically, nobody's going to get that. But we are still concerned because it is about 20%, less than 20% of the population will get it, will be giving it to their kids. And so that's really why we're still very concerned, because we don't want these kids following ill-advised advice by these corrupt regulatory agencies, risking their health, reducing their child's lifespan. We don't want any of this. It's got to stop.
Can I just finish off on one last point, and it's to do with cancer, the turbo cancer, and we've had Professor Dalgleish from the UK. We've had Professor Makis on from Canada. I've had conversation with Rand Cole about the US, and it's this rise of turbo cancer. And you'd put on your post, over 100 studies show mRNA shots may cause cancer via 7 distinct mechanisms. Official CDC data reveals 110,000 plus excess deaths in the US since 2021, and the surge is still accelerating. Is this we in the UK? We see probably every week another newspaper article that has cancer rates are surging because of XYZ, gardening, walking, being with your pets, having your sandwich, whatever it is that they can, and to make sure they don't link it to a rollout of a jab. What's the situation in the US? Are people begin to wake up, or the media begin to accept it, or is this something that they still refuse to connect the dots?
Yeah, most people, I believe at this point, at least here in America, do believe that these mRNA injections can cause what's called turbo cancer, or these extraordinarily accelerated and invasive cancers that kill very quickly. And but there's so much scientific evidence now that we have collected, and actually we actually had a recent study. We just uploaded it to the preprint server. That got that's it's actually the number one trending preprint in the world right now. We actually found that mRNA shots induce severe genetic dysregulation linked to cancer. So we actually looked in cancer patients. They developed cancer shortly after mRNA injection, and thousands of genes were disrupted, many of which are involved in cancer DNA repair, as well as tumor suppression genes. So tumors were not being suppressed, DNA was not being repaired, and that appears what these mRNA injections are inducing molecularly in people, which is very disturbing. And we do know the spike protein inhibits many tumor suppressor genes as well. That's corroborated by multiple studies. But yeah, there is a literature review where over 100 studies um, have looked at various components of the mRNA injections. And there does appear to be about 17 distinct mechanisms that they may induce cancer. And then um, ethical skeptic. He is on X. He is a data analysis or analyst. Sorry. He has actually found, using CDC data, so official data, that there have been about 110,000 excess cancer deaths in the United States since the vaccines rolled out in 2021. And so we see this safety signal population level. We see it biologically in the injured. Clearly, these shots are indeed carcinogenic, and that's yet another reason why they do not belong in people's arms.
Nicholas, it's great to have you on. Love the information you put out. It's sometimes depressing, but it's important that the public are aware. And what you're doing with the McCullough Foundation is essential, I think, to educating the public on these range of concerns of the rollout of the jab. So thank you so much for giving us your time today.
Thanks for having me.